لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Alright, so last week we had started talking about, or we had finished our discussion of the third condition for a sound hadith, which is what?
Connected chain.
A connected chain. So far we've talked about three things. What is the first condition? Adala, which means? Trustworthiness. And the second condition is? Trustworthiness, precision. Good. And the last one, which we discussed yesterday? Last week, I'm sorry.
Connected chain.
The connected chain. These three are meant to help us verify a piece of information. They're there to verify a khabar on whether it is true or not. And we said that the two main things that affect a narration are?
Just missing.
Lying and what? Remember, these are the two things that we're trying to fight against when it comes to dealing with a piece of information. Lying and what?
Fabrication.
Disconnected chain.
Fabrication is lying. Huh?
The chain is not connected.
What? The connection of the chain, well, we'll talk about why that's important. So, the first one. We said the first one, lying or error. Absolutely. Right? So either it can be a lie or it can be a mistaken report. And all of these conditions are there to help remove these possibilities. So we had talked about that the trustworthiness, what does this help remove?
Out of the line.
Huh? Right, if they're lying, it helps remove lies.
Yeah.
Like in precision,
Errors.
what does that help us verify? What? Does this help us remove the lie or does it help us remove the mistake? It helps us remove mistakes, right? So do these help each other? Yeah, absolutely. Like the connected chain. That also helps. What is that a focus on? Right, this is a focus on precision. Right? Because the thing is, the lying, we've already established that as long as these people are trustworthy, then at that point we already know that this lie has been removed, right? The chance of them lying is gone. And we need to make sure now that the mistakes are gone. So there's actually a layered approach in how that's done. And the third part of this, or the next part of this, is al-muḥaddithīn, or lack of a hidden defect. Now, hidden is something that is very telling when we talk about the chain. And we'll mention why that is. So, what is a hidden defect? A hidden defect is that which would jeopardize the soundness of a hadith, even though apparently it may seem sound. So, a problematic hadith is one where the defect is found, and an apparently sound narration, after research, this shortcoming is discovered. So, when we say hidden, when I look at the hadith, what do I see?
It looks good.
It looks good. It looks good. So apparently, when I look at this hadith, it looks sound. It looks good to me.
Reliable.
Right? It looks reliable, but the defect is, that's why it's called hidden. That's why it's called hidden, because it is not apparent. So, and the goal is to ensure the lack of such defects. So, if I have one of these three problems, if the narrator is not trustworthy, or the narrator is not precise, or the chain is broken, can you do me a favor? Can you tell them to turn the switch on to turn the sound off in this room? Because it's just like the buzzing. Yeah, the buzzing is really bothering me. So if one of these three things are found, if I have a chain that has a narrator that's not trustworthy, or if I have a chain where the narrator is not precise, or the chain is broken, what would I rule on that hadith?
It's not sahih.
Right, it's not sahih, it's not sound. It's to be rejected. Is that hidden? No. Yes?
If it's not sahih, it could be hasan, right? Even if...
How? If it's not...
If
So
it's
here,
not,
and I use the word sound on purpose, right? Meaning that this hadith is not acceptable. This hadith is not accepted. Now, can it be hasan? Because over here, if he's not trustworthy, no, it can't be. If he's not dhabit, he can't be.
Even if it has one defect, it can't be...
No, it can't. You know why? Because...
Major
Right, so exactly. So there has to be some kind of problem with the narrative. So even with adala, even with trustworthiness, is there a spectrum? You know, are there some people who are more trustworthy than others? But all of them as a whole are what? They're trustworthy. And even when it comes to precision, are some people more precise than others? Absolutely. But does that mean that, there has to be a level between that, there's a spectrum between that? When it comes to a connected chain, is there a spectrum of connection?
Yep.
Are there chains that are more connected than others? It's either connected or not. Right? That's it. These are the only two choices. But concerning the trustworthiness and the precision, there's going to be a gradation. There's going to be a level that's there. That's for sure. Now, on the lower end, this is where we would have what we call in our modern terminology a hadith hasan. No, it doesn't work here. We tried. There's a switch above the cabinets. There's 3 of them. The middle one can be flipped out. But over here, if I don't have one of these characteristics, I say that the hadith is rejected. It's not to be accepted. Is this an illah? Is this the hidden defect that we're looking for?
It's one of the hidden defects. There could be other.
So if I see that the narrator is not trustworthy, is it hidden?
No.
It's apparent, right? It's clear. It's there. Or if I see that he's not logical, right? If he's not precise, the defect is there. It's clear. If I see that there's a break in the chain, if there's a break in the chain, it's also. if there's a break in the chain, it's also. It's already very clear.
If they're also heavily scrutinized.
If they're it's not his. Right? So if I see a narrator here and he's like, okay, this narrator is a liar. Is there any more depth I need to do? Any more research I need to do? No, absolutely not. So if we understand that this science, or this part of the science, or this section is a discussion of those hidden defects, then those are the 3 things we're actually not going to be looking at. Yes, they were. Just like what that. Those 3 things are not going to be the things that we're going to be researching and spending time on. Why? Because those things are what?
Apparent.
Those things are apparent. And our job in this section is to talk about things that are hidden. And again, these are all apparent defects. The hidden defect is one where none of the previous conditions are manifest. And we had talked, the 3 previous conditions we've already spoken about. We've spoken about trustworthiness, we've spoken about precision, and we've spoken about connected chains. So if the defect is not apparent in the chain itself, where can I find it?
In the text, in the context.
Sometimes the text doesn't always give an indication to that.
You have the mat or mat.
So here, let me give an example of this. If I have a text of hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ. He says that actions are by intention. This hadith is what? Sahih. Like, what if one of the narrators is mistaken and he puts another isnad on this? Is it going to be apparent in the text of the hadith?
No.
It's not. So where do I look? The matan can. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not. What you guys said is not a wrong answer. That the statement itself, or the piece of information itself, it can be indicative that there's something wrong in the chain, right? Hey, what if that isn't apparent?
The chain itself too.
I can't look in the chain.
Because sometimes.
Because if I looked in the chain, the defect is what?
Apparent.
It's apparent. You understand?
So we always have to scrutinize and go through.
I'm saying you're going through the chain. So but basically, the argument here is that you have to look outside of the chain.
So would you just look at other known hadith that are known to be strong or weak?
Absolutely.
Can you compare it?
Absolutely.
Cross-reference?
You have to compare it. You have to compare it. That's the only way for me to determine. Or, and this is something we'll talk about inshallah later, you have to have a scholar who has knowledge of what? Yeah, not just knowledge of hadith. He has to know about the chains. He has to know about narrators. He has to know about
knowledge of how he can detect the defects, like how he can find the defects. Because you said something. If the hadith looks good, not all readers can know how to spot the defects. But some people they can't suspect the defects or find the defects.
They can find them because they'll be like, okay, well, yes, these people lived in the same time period, but he never studied with them. How would you know that?
What do you mean?
Meaning that if I have a chain of narration and this person it's like, okay, this is the shaykh and this is the student. Me as an observer, I'll be like, okay, well, they lived in the same time period. It's possible that they what? That they met. But me as a hadith scholar, I'll be like, okay, well, this is not actually his student. He never sat with him. He never left Khurasan. And this guy was sitting in Egypt. Yes?
I'm not mistaken, Muslim classics said when they gathered, they used to keep notes who was in that class.
Yes.
Who was in,
Absolutely.
who attended.
Yeah.
And if they were even sleeping or paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, so subhanAllah, man, you have these books. You have these books like Imam Sa'id, I think he has a very famous one. It's called like Al-Imali. You know, it's like basically the sittings where they did imla and where they would dictate and they'd talk about, okay, and on this day, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so was present.
It was recorded, basically.
Yeah, it was recorded. You know, did that happen in every single gathering? No, it didn't, but there were many, many recordings of these things actually happening. So you have to look outside of it, and where do you look? And this is what we're going to talk about and spend a little bit of time on. So Imam Hatim, he says in his very famous al-Hadith, a hadith with a hidden defect is exposed not due to a clear criticism of it. And something that we've already established. Right? Because if there's a clear criticism, then that is not going to be a research into what? Into hidden defects. A clearly criticized hadith is one that has a missing narrator versus a hidden defect which is predominantly in the narrations of those that are trustworthy. And he goes on to say, they narrate something that has a hidden defect that even they are unaware of. So sometimes even the narrator himself, what happens? He doesn't know why. Because he's mistaken. Because he's mistaken. And this will come into play a little bit later on why that's important. They narrate something that has a hidden defect that even they are unaware of, and such a hadith becomes defective, or known as ma'lum. Ibn Salah, he says in his very famous ulūm al-Hadith, that it is found in chains that have trustworthy narrators, those that fulfill the conditions of acceptance, apparently, or superficially. So again, reinforcing this idea that these are hadith. The hadith that we're going to be dealing with here, me as a very basic researcher, if I looked at the hadith, I would say that this hadith is what? Sahih, and sound. But it requires the scholars of ilm to actually give us more detail into them. So what relationship does this condition have with being free of mistakes or lies? So if we're talking about this condition now, hidden defects, where do you think, what are we trying to minimize here? Is it lying or mistakes?
Mistakes.
It's definitely mistakes. So using the previous conditions, we can conclude with relative certainty that this narration is not a purposeful lie, and the strong possibility that is not a mistake. And I'm going to talk about this. So this layer is an additional layer to ensure that it is not a mistake, which at this point would clearly be unintentional. So how is that done? Through, like was mentioned before, comparative analysis. So we have a narrator's narration must be compared to other sound narrators and narrations. And when I look at them, so I have 10 narrations in front of me, do they all agree? Or do they all disagree? And if they disagree, this individual, if you have 5 narrators saying something and 1 narrator saying the opposite, which one is right? 5. Majority? I don't know. You have to look into it. Right? This requires more discovery. Because is it possible that the sheikh they heard from, when he narrated it to the one student, he narrated it correctly, and when it was the time for the majlis for the 5, he narrated it to them incorrectly?
Or maybe the one who went against them found something that they didn't know about.
I mean, there's a number of possibilities. Right? There are a number of possibilities that are definitely there. In some ways they do this is at looking at the number of narrations, because logically, if you have 5 versus 1, what are you going to choose? You're going to choose the 5. You're going to choose the majority because you're going to assume that the majority are correct. The other thing, the strength of narrators that he's challenging. So even amongst narrators, you have a spectrum, like we had spoken about. And you have some narrators who are stronger and some narrators that are weaker. If I have 5 weaker narrators, and not because they themselves are weak, but they're weaker in comparison. So I have somebody who's known to be an imam, somebody to be like a giant in the field. And I have 5 lesser people, even though they themselves are strong, does this now give a little bit more weight to what he has to say? Yes. Right? Even though it's 5 versus 1, even then you'd be like, oh man, but he's saying it. And we deal with this in our daily lives too. Sometimes we'll have like 5, 10, 15 people tell us something, but it's like, well, but the imam said this, right? Or, well, actually my professor said this, right? You know what I mean? So you might have a bunch of people telling us stuff, but because of this person's knowledge, because of this person's status, because of who this person is, he will have more weight in our eyes. And like we said, but if we have 6 equal people, usually we're going to give preference to the majority. Hatim al-Baghdadi, he said, and this is in his, I think his Jami' al-Akhlaq al-Rawi, the way to determine a hidden defect is by comparing narrations, looking at where they differ, taking into account their status concerning memorization, precision, and accuracy. The 2 things that we were talking about before. either looking at the number or looking at the strength. Yahya ibn Ma'in, a very famous Naqd, or a very famous Hadith critic, he said, we would not understand a Hadith until we recorded it from 30 paths. What do you guys think about that? That if he has a Hadith, what would be the first thing a Hadith critic does? Right? He would go and look, say, okay, are there any other chains for this Hadith? And he's saying here, and he's saying it a little bit out of exaggeration, he's like, I wouldn't actually engage this Hadith until I found what? 30 other chains for it, to help me understand. And this understanding here, it can be in a few ways. One of those ways can be in what?
Meaning, recognize it as authentic and maybe for
Absolutely.
application.
Right? So, absolutely. Either it can be in determining its authenticity, or to see how the Hadith is actually applied. Because from these other chains, what else am I going to be getting out of it? In addition to the other narrators, that's for sure. But from the Hadith itself, what else can I get from it? Sometimes I can get different wordings, meanings. Sometimes I can get more information. Sometimes I can get more context. Right? There's so many things that I can get from the Hadith by gathering all of these different narrations. Ali ibn Madini, he said, if all the Hadith in a chapter are not gathered, the mistakes will not become apparent. And by chapter here, I mean that all of the Hadith that share the same meaning. So if I have a Hadith with a particular meaning, if I don't gather all of the Hadith that share that meaning, I'll get to you, that share that meaning, then there's no way for me to truly understand the mistakes out of it. Yes, hold it.
So the question. So same Hadith but narrated by multiple narrators, right? But
Yeah.
The wordings are different.
Not always.
Not all. I mean,
Yeah.
there are one or two maybe.
Sure.
But reliable sources, does that make that like the Zaif or Hassan? Like if there are one or two wordings.
Sure.
Like let's say if I heard it from you,
Yeah.
and then I told somebody else, maybe I change one of the words by
Sure.
mistake and
Sure.
and then no.
Yeah. So how would you? So that's a good question. If
Like the other day I was listening to a lecture and
Yeah.
one Hadith was given in 5 different.
Sure. So was the meaning any different in those
Meaning's
5?
the same.
The meaning's the same.
Um,
So what does that tell you?
I mean, I just want to like confirm with.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you guys.
Like, I'm saying hidden, right? Like you're saying, is it
So that's one possibility, that there's a defect there, right? This is one possibility. What is the other possibility? So here, if I have 5 narrations, all of them are talking about the same instance. They're talking about the same story, but it's a little bit different. There's differences in them. The meaning is the same in all 5, but the wording is different. So what can I learn from that?
When they memorize
The interpretation.
All right. So here you're saying that the Prophet ﷺ probably said it multiple times, and they're relaying it in multiple ways. She's saying that these people actually are relaying it not by wording, but by meaning.
Yes.
And this is by agreement amongst the scholars of Hadith that it is permissible to narrate by meaning. So what you have here is when you have these five different wordings that share the same meaning, all the scholars will be like, yeah, it's fine. It's okay. And having these small differences, having these small little differences, it doesn't change anything. Why? Because the meaning is still the same.
As long as the changed word is not open
As long as it doesn't.
for interpretation.
So I'm saying, even if it is, let's say that there's one word in one of the narrations that is open for interpretation, as long as I have those other 5 that give me, because that'll give me context in how the word is being used. It's like, okay, yeah, he used this word here, but the use is in line with these other 5. Right? But if there's another meaning for that word that goes against these other 5, I'm going to take the meaning that agrees, not the one that goes against. Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, he said that the means to differentiating between a sound hadith and one that has a defect, and he took from Hatim, he said, is to gather all its routes. If they are found to match and reinforce one another, then the soundness becomes self-apparent. When they differ, a hidden defect becomes apparent. The central point of finding hidden defects is in reality found by showing differences.
Yes. It's related to, again, the same hadith, 5 different narrations, right?
Yeah.
Like Imam Muslim, he said,
Mhm.
not duplicate
Yeah.
2 hadiths in 1. So
Yeah, yeah.
and making sure, but how did he decide which one to take, which one to take it out? And it's, like same.
So, so basically what he does is he has a pool of a hadith that he chooses from. There can be a number of reasons he chooses the one that he chose. Number one, either he feels it was the strongest, or he feels that, okay, there's so many strong hadith in this, he can arbitrarily choose some, or he can say, okay, I haven't used this narrator in previous hadith, I'm going to include in here to show that this narrator is what? Trustworthy. So there's so many different ways to kind of mold and play with that. As for his particular reasoning behind specific hadith, we don't know because we'd have to ask him. But in general, are there certain things that become apparent? It's like, okay, well, he mentions, like for example, he only has one narration on Ikrimah in his entire Sahih. But he brings him. Why does he bring him?
Just like showing him.
To show that he's a trustworthy narrator, and he brings him with somebody who he actually feels to be more trustworthy. To say like, okay, no, this person is trustworthy. I didn't fully rely on him, but I'm going to bring his narration on purpose to show that he is actually trustworthy. You will have him bringing, for example, 5 hadith that are sound, generally agree in their meaning, to show that there are multiple routes for this. Because by him showing that there are multiple routes, what does that give me as a reader?
Reinforcement.
It gives reinforcement and confidence in the hadith. And then he'll bring one that goes against. Why will he do that? Be like, okay, well this one is popular too, and the narrators are trustworthy, but there's a problem. There's a problem in the hadith. And I gave a little bit of indication to this in the Sahih Muslim class, because even in the Muqaddimah, he mentions in the last one that lying upon me is not lying on anyone else. Whoever lies upon me is a, and he says this first part of the hadith is not mentioned in the other narrations.
Yeah, you said that.
Yeah.
You read 2 or 3 different.
Yeah, there's a few different narrations, and the thing is, like, you see him to start doing those things to kind of give, like, okay, and not just that, as a reader, it'll help differentiate between who actually knows what they're talking about and who, like, who's going to pick up on it and who's not going to pick up on it. And he's doing it, he does it slightly. Sometimes he changes the name. So one of the things he did is he mentioned the Ghunda in the first narration, he mentions Ibn Bashar in the second narration, and they're both the same person. But if you don't know, you don't know. Right? This is for somebody who's actually specialized in the field. And what did he say? One of the reasons he wrote his book is like because everybody started writing about this. And I want to do it to actually show that there's a difference between scholars in this field and people who just kind of gather things together. So rival schools. So some of the Mutakallimin, and I think the author mentions the Mutakallimin there. I don't think he means in how we use it in modern terminology. This is probably the Mu'tazili, the Mu'tazilites, because they were known as the early Mutakallimin. Yeah, I think this was, I'm mistaken in this. This, I'm pretty sure it is the Mu'tazilis. Is actually accused Ahl al-Hadith of wasting their time gathering all their narrations. And what proof did they use? They used a hadith of Abu Umayr. He says, Abu Umayr, what happened to the Nughayr? So this is the Prophet ﷺ. He's speaking to this young boy, and he said, Ya Abu Umayr, what happened to the Nughayr? What happened to the small bird? Because the bird, for those that know the story, what happened to the bird? It died, right? So the bird died. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said to the boy, he said, Ya Abu Umayr, what happened to the Nughayr? What happened to your bird? Right, so what happened to the bird? And they say this hadith has no benefit. And you guys spend all of this time, wasting your time, gathering all of these narrations and trying to pinpoint them. So this is one of the responses that the Mu'tazili school, or the Mu'tazilites had to say about this. What do you guys think? Huh?
Why is it wasted?
Boo-hum.
I mean, it's like a good example of emotional intelligence and everything.
Okay. No, so this is one of the benefits that you took away from it, right? It's a good example of emotional intelligence. It's a good example of empathy. So there is benefit that's there. Yes?
Another benefit would be, it is allowed to make these kind of jokes, like puns.
Yeah, for sure. Policy. We'll come back after slow. So going back to what we were talking about, and we had mentioned that there are some of the rival schools, and basically the Mu'tazila. So the Mu'tazila, they had a few issues with the scholars of Hadith and their madhab. And we'll talk about some of those inshallah. But basically they accuse Ahl al-Hadith of wasting their time. And we had mentioned here that this hadith, Abu Umayr, what happened to the Nughayr, they said that this hadith has little benefit, and you guys spend a lot of your time, and most of your time, trying to just gather up all of these different narrations. Even you guys pulled out some benefits from this. Another benefit from this if he owned a bird, what does that make it permissible? Does that make it permissible to own birds now and put them in cages?
To have a pet.
To have a pet. Can you have a pet or no?
Yes.
Yes. This hadith is a proof of that. Yes or no? Otherwise, why would the Prophet have allowed him in the first place? Okay. No, I mean it's okay.
Okay.
No, just leave it. And, the important thing is I can take the video later. So you have Ibn al-Qas. Wait, do you guys know his madhab? Take a wild guess. Jafar. All right. He wrote a book that explained this hadith as a response to those critics. And there's a few things that he said. What are some of those things? He says there are 60 legal benefits from this hadith. Legal. These are not just fawaid, right? These are not just general benefits that he takes away. He says there are actually 60 legal benefits from this. And then he goes on to mention the benefit of gathering narrations in both number and in comparison. What are some hadithi benefits we can take away from this? So you guys mentioned fiqh, like fiqh, empathy, and all those things are great. Those are good for sure. But me as a scholar of hadith, what are some benefits I can take away?
They can show you sides.
Okay. It'll give me insight into other narrations. I mean, there's not a lot going on here, right? Huh? Okay, maybe.
Define hadith, what are you saying?
So as a hadith scholar, my main focus is what? Like a fiqh scholar, what is his focus? When you give a fiqh scholar a hadith, what is his focus? To take the rulings up. As a hadith scholar, what is my purpose and my goal? To authenticate it, right? To make sure that this is ascribable to the Prophet ﷺ, right? This is my goal. So what can I benefit as a hadith scholar? I have this hadith now. Ya Abu Umair, ماذا فعل النبي? What can I benefit from this as a hadith scholar? Huh?
There's so many things. Like, first of all, like, you could create a chain. Like, say that this kid grows up and has something really, really, really relevant. You could prove that he did, in fact, meet the Prophet.
So Amr ibn Tufayl, he's actually the last famous companion to die.
See, I didn't know that.
He died in 120 Hijri. Last one to die. Like, what else? Well, that's just a benefit, though. What else can I take away? Like, you said that there's a connected chain. That's one. Yes?
The wording, the linguistic nouns, meaning they would understand how they would make jokes or something.
Okay, that's fine. Again, those are benefits I would take outside of the... So there's a general benefit that we take, and there's a hadithi benefit, which is I'm looking at.
Hadithi meaning they would get accustomed to his speech.
Okay, so this basically it would be added to the repertoire of the muhaddith that the Prophet ﷺ, even he speaks in. This is one of the ways that he speaks, and this is how he dealt with children. This is how he spoke to children. So if we see a hadith of him talking to children, it gives us an idea of how he spoke to them. Mumtaz. Good. What else?
Just the fact that it's hadith and it's like this is the way it's done. The structure of it.
Okay.
It doesn't matter the topic or like the content of the hadith. Like they need to get to even if it was like hadith about the bird or
they
need to get
the chains.
The chains and all the details about it.
Okay, so you're getting the ulūm. If I have multiple chains that go back to this hadith, and this hadith is sahih by the way, this hadith is sound. If I have multiple chains going to this hadith, how does that benefit me now as a scholar of hadith?
Reinforces.
So they can not just reinforce one another, that gives me what? What am I getting out?
Information about the narrators.
I'm getting information about narrators. You understand? So now, if I want to find out about a narrator, and one of the narrators is in this chain, I can use it as a supporting evidence that, okay, no, these are some of the other hadith that he narrates, and this narrator is part of chains that are what? That are sahih and sound. You guys see? And this is how it was done. So you might have a hadith on 50 different topics, but if you have this person is consistently narrating sahih hadith in all of these topics, that gives me more trust in, right, in the individual himself. So this is one of the big hadithi benefits that are there. That it helps me, and sometimes, even in some of these chains, there might be a narrator mentioned in a particular way, and I couldn't figure out who he was from other chains. But once I looked into this chain, what happens? It'll help me determine exactly who he is. Because I see the same sheikh and I see the same student, I just don't know who this guy is. Like I can't figure it out. But now I have his full name, and now I can determine and figure out and go through the books of Tarikh. I can go through the books of like the biographies of these different narrators and actually determine who he is. So there are a number of different benefits that you have just by gathering chains, and we didn't even talk about the text itself, right? The text itself, you guys told me a whole bunch of benefits. That it gives us an idea how the Prophet spoke. There are some 50 benefits that you take from it. It talks about the empathy of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and these are just with the text itself, right? Forget the chain. This is just from the text. From the chain itself, there are multiple benefits that we had spoken about as well. It allows us, to increase the comparison. It allows us more insight into the narrators. It allows us more insight into grading those narrators in those particular chains. Because if I have similar chains of narration, that mention different other hadith, that also gives me trust in those hadith. Because I'm like, okay, well, they're sahih here, and these same group of people are narrating this here, there's a better chance that it is also authentic. He also says that if seeking knowledge is an obligation, then gathering narrations is at the least a habit. That is supererogatory. Ibn Qas. Some other benefits. In response to those who refute accepting khabar al-wahid. So he mentions, these are in addition. Khabar al-wahid, the opposite of it is what? Mutawatir. Very important. Very important thing. So who had a problem with this? It was the Mu'tazila, right? So it was the Mu'tazili school, the rationalist school that had this issue or this problem with khabar al-ahad. Not as a whole, right? Not as a whole, but for them it was more like, okay, it's okay to doubt the hadith tradition because most of it is narrated by khabar al-ahad. And why do I say that they didn't have complete problem with it? Because they themselves used ahad hadith. And many Mu'tazili, what fiqh school did they follow? Do you guys know? They're Hanafi. So it's not like they distrusted the tradition altogether. It's just like, okay, well, there's room for doubt, and what will take me over the edge on whether I can doubt or accept this narration is the fact if it is logical or not. Some claim that there needed to be two at each stage of narration. So basically they said, in order for me to trust this hadith, there have to be two narrators at every level of that, saying that this is similar to witnessing. Some claim that there require three, and they use the verse, فَلَوْلَا نَفَرٌ مِنْ كُلِّ فِرْقَةٍ مِّنْهُمْ طَائِفَةٌ لِيَتَفَقَّهُوا فِي الدِّينِ, that a group should go out to gain understanding of the religion, and a group is minimum 3 people. They also go on saying, some claim 4 as the witnessing required for major accounts. So if there's something that is major, it requires sometimes minimum 4 witnesses. Some claim that which is well known and famous. Like these narrators who are narrating, all of them have to be well known. All of them have to be famous, otherwise we can't accept it. Also, gathering narrations can fulfill all of these conditions, and even if not, with more precision than eyewitnessing. So he said, now this is Ibn Qas here. He says, if you gather all of these different narrations, it is able to what? Fulfill every one of these conditions. The more narrations that you gather, the more likelihood of these conditions being fulfilled. There are multiple pathways to establish a narration, even if one or some of them are rejected. So if I have 20 pathways to this hadith, and I just have like 1 or 2 that go against it, it still gives me confidence that the hadith is authentic and sound. Knowing the number of narrations of a particular narrator, not just relying on his knowledge or memory alone. So we have said that there are a few ways to gauge whether a hadith is sound in light of other narrations. So when doing this comparative analysis, the 2 major ways are the number of narrations, right, which is one way. If I have a vast majority narrating it one way, then it's most likely that this is the way that is correct. Or if I have the strength of the person who is narrating, right, that gives a lot of importance behind the strength behind the text itself. It gives more insight into mistakes, lies, or not mentioning narrators. So if we only have one narration and nothing to compare it against, then we have no way to measure. I wouldn't say no way. I think this is wrong. I'll correct that. But it is far more difficult to measure a narrator or narrations themselves. And the ultimate goal is to remove doubt. The ultimate goal here is to remove doubt. And this method exposes the mistakes a narrator might have made. So if we take this layered approach, there are different qualities that we are seeking as we're going through this process in order to decrease the doubt. So the first, is he trustworthy? Right? So once I know, if the only thing I know about this piece of narration that is trustworthy, can I trust the narration? No, but it allows me to trust it. Like it gives it a little bit more credence. if it's precise, now I know this person is trustworthy and he's precise, then it gives a little bit more credence. If I know that is connected, again, it gives a little bit more credence. And this last one, if I, well, it shouldn't be mistakes. Yeah, I did, right? So over here, if I'm looking for if I know that it doesn't have these hidden defects, it decreases my doubt in that narration. But you'll find, minus the first, these here, they're focused more so on what? When we talk about whether it be a lie or a mistake, this one is focused on mainly
Lie.
if it's a lie and character, and this one is a focus on mistakes. Because meaning, and this tells us that the Muḥaddithīn, they never overlooked mistakes as a possibility. At all of these stages, mistakes is something that was never overlooked. They continued pursuing and trying to lessen the doubt as much as logically possible. So what if I have nothing to compare his narrations to? Tawaqquf is a possibility, right? Where I stop, I don't make a hukum. But this is where we're going to talk about next time. I think we should do it. Right, to tune in next time, right? Yeah, that's coming up. So if I don't have anything to compare it to, and you know what? This is the final condition for a sound hadith. So if I have this lone rapport, how do I deal with it? Inshallah, we're going to talk about this next time. We'll take maybe a short break, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, inshallah, so that I can set up some of this recording stuff, and then we'll come back with this. Also, I received a question. I think Wasan sent it. There's a process to weed out those narrations that may have mistakes or may be defective, which we've discussed. And how does Imam Muslim determine which to discard and which to note, and what is the wisdom behind including it? So the wisdom behind including narrations that are mistaken is to show what? There are a few things that I can benefit from that. So if I'm bringing a narration that I know is mistaken and I'm including it in my book, why am I including it?
What not to?
Okay, well, what not to do, sure.
Worded poorly.
To show I know this.
To show his awareness that this narrator is made a mistake. Or the other possibility is that this last narration is what? It's well known. This is what people use. And the reason I'm bringing it is to show what?
Yeah, to make sure other narrators don't use this mistake.
Not just, it's khalas. Once it's written, it's done. Right? The narration is going to be finished.
For the public.
For the public. So that the people don't use it and they don't think that, oh, no, this is actually attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, when in reality, it's not. Because even the narration he's bringing, remember, the isnad is what?
It's authentic.
Yeah, isnad is authentic. So just because me as an observer, I look, I say, well, this isnad looks authentic, but in actuality, what he's narrating, he was what? He was mistaken. Does that help?
Yeah, it helps. So in other cases where there's a similar pattern, but it's not included, why is it not included?
Like what? Can you give me, to help me understand?
Yeah, 10 say one thing, the other person in the book says something that says in addition.
Yeah.
Now, why did he include that one per se versus another one that he did not include? If that makes any sense.
Okay, so he included probably for a couple of reasons. Number one, the isnad is authentic. Right? The isnad being an authentic thing, and to point out that this narrator actually made a mistake here. Because all of these narrators are saying X, Y, Z, and he's saying A, B, C. The problem is here, the problem is with him, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't actually say it. And it could be, again, the isnad has to be sahih, it has to be authentic. And secondly, it has to be, because this is something that people might actually be using, and they might be relying upon. So he's making note of that, even though it sounds like the rest, it's actually mistaken. Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
I'll see you guys in a couple minutes.